The Birthday Promise. The celestial room gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each table draped in pristine white linen that seemed to glow in the ambient lighting. Sophia Reyes clutched her worn leather camera bag closer to her side as she approached the hostess stand, feeling the weight of eyes upon her. At 32, she was used to blending into backgrounds, disappearing behind her camera lens as she captured wildlife in their natural habitats. Tonight, however, there was nowhere to hide. "I have a reservation for one," she said softly. "Under Reyes." The hostess, a tall woman with immaculate blonde hair, glanced down at her tablet, then slowly raised her eyes to assess Sophia. Her gaze lingered on Sophia's simple navy dress, purchased years ago for a cousin's wedding, and the scuffed boots that had traversed mountain trails and jungle paths. "Are you certain you have the right establishment?" The hostess's voice was honey-coated venom. Sophia straightened her posture. "Yes, I made the reservation 3 weeks ago." With a barely concealed sigh, the hostess led her through the restaurant. Past couples draped in designer wear and business executives engaged in hushed negotiations. Sophia felt a flush creeping up her neck as she noticed diners pausing mid-conversation to observe her passage. They arrived at a small table tucked beside the swinging kitchen doors, where dishes clattered and servers shouted orders. "Will this be suitable?" the hostess asked, not waiting for an answer before dropping the menu on the table and retreating. Sophia slid into the chair, placing her father's photograph discreetly on the table. His smiling face gazed up at her from the rainforest of Costa Rica, where they'd taken their last trip together before the cancer diagnosis. "I made it, Dad," she whispered. "Just like I promised." 3 tables away, Julian Mercer observed the scene with quiet interest. At 40, he'd grown weary of the academic politics that dominated his life as a literature professor at the university. He came to the Celestial Room occasionally, finding the food excellent even if the company often left much to be desired. Tonight, he'd been avoiding a faculty dinner, preferring solitude with his thoughts and a good Cabernet. The woman's arrival had disrupted the restaurant's carefully cultivated atmosphere. Julian noticed how the maitre d' had seated her by the kitchen, how the waitstaff seemed to orbit around her table without actually stopping to take her order. He saw her place a photograph on the table, the intimate gesture at odds with the restaurant's cold opulence. When a waiter accidentally bumped her chair and barely mumbled an apology, Julian made his decision. Signaling his server, he requested to speak with the manager. Minutes later, Julian approached her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm but assured. "I couldn't help noticing that you've been waiting quite a while. I believe there's been a misunderstanding with your seating." Sophia looked up, startled by the kindness in his eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber that seemed to catch the chandelier light. "I'm Julian Mercer," he continued, extending his hand. "And I've just spoken with the manager about the appalling service you've received. He's offered us his apologies and a table by the window if you'd care to join me." I don't need charity," Sophia replied, though her voice trembled slightly. Julian smiled, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "It's not charity. It's justice. And perhaps if you're amenable, it's the pleasure of dining with someone who doesn't seem consumed by appearances." He nodded toward the photograph. "Someone who understands what matters." Sophia hesitated, studying him, his tailored gray suit, the silver at his temples, the genuine warmth in his expression that contrasted with the calculated smiles surrounding them. "I'm Sophia Reyes," she finally said, gathering her belongings. "And I'd be honored to join you, Professor Mercer." Julian's eyebrows rose. "How did you know I'm a professor?" A small smile played at her lips. "The elbow patches on your jacket, the fountain pen in your pocket, and the copy of Garcia Marquez peeking out of your bag. Either you're a professor or remarkably committed to appearing scholarly." For the first time that evening, Julian laughed with genuine delight. As he guided her toward the better table, the restaurant seemed to shift around them, servers suddenly materializing with attentive service, the maitre d' appearing with profuse apologies and complimentary champagne. Under the golden light of the chandeliers, surrounded by the murmurs of the wealthy and powerful, Sophia and Julian began their unexpected connection. 2 souls recognizing something rare and valuable in each other, something that had nothing to do with status or appearance. but everything to do with seeing beyond the surface to the heart beneath. Unexpected connections. The window table offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, glittering against the night like stars fallen to earth. Sophia sat across from Julian, the complimentary champagne untouched beside her water glass. "I don't usually drink," she explained, noticing his questioning glance. "I need steady hands for my work." Julian tilted his head, curious. "And what work is that?" "I'm a wildlife photographer," Sophia said, a hint of pride warming her voice. "Mostly freelance. I document endangered species in their natural habitats." She hesitated, then reached for her worn leather bag, extracting a small portfolio. "These are some recent shots from my trip to the Galapagos." Julian accepted the portfolio with careful hands, opening it to reveal stunning images of blue-footed boobies, marine iguanas, and giant tortoises. Each photograph captured not just the animal, but a moment, an emotion, a story. "These are extraordinary," he murmured, lingering over a shot of a tortoise's ancient eye, reflecting decades of silent wisdom. "You see them as individuals, not specimens." Sophia's cheeks flushed with pleasure. "That's the highest compliment you could give. Most publications want the standard shots, what sells magazines. I'm interested in what makes people care about conservation." "Is that what brought you here tonight?" Julian asked, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "Looking for wealthy donors?" The question might have sounded accusatory from someone else, but his tone held only genuine curiosity. Sophia glanced down at her father's photograph. "No, it's more personal. My father was a high school biology teacher who spent summers volunteering for conservation projects. He always dreamed of dining here, but teachers' salaries and 3 kids made it impossible." She traced the edge of the photo with her fingertip. "Before he died last year, he made me promise to experience the things he couldn't. Tonight would have been his 70th birthday." Julian was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss," he finally said, his voice soft. "He must have been remarkable." "He was," Sophia smiled, the memory brightening her eyes. "Now I've answered your question, what about you? What brings a literature professor to dine alone at the most exclusive restaurant in the city?" Julian swirled the wine in his glass. "Avoidance, primarily. There's a faculty dinner tonight celebrating Professor Whitaker's latest publication, a thoroughly derivative analysis of modernist poetry that somehow earned him a 6-figure advance." Sophia laughed. "You sound bitter." "Not bitter," Julian corrected with a half-smile. "Disillusioned. I entered academia because I believed in the transformative power of literature, how the right book at the right moment can change a life. Now I spend my days surrounded by people more concerned with prestige than passion." The waiter arrived with their appetizers, delicate scallops for Julian and a colorful beet salad for Sophia. As they ate, their conversation flowed effortlessly from literature to photography, from Julian's students to Sophia's travels. "You've lived such an adventurous life," Julian observed. "Tracking jaguars in Brazil, documenting coral bleaching in Australia." Sophia shook her head. "It sounds more glamorous than it is. Most days involve waiting in uncomfortable conditions, eating terrible food, and sleeping in tents that leak when it rains." Her eyes sparkled. "But then there are moments, like watching a humpback whale breach at sunrise or seeing a snow leopard in the wild, that make everything else fade away. That's how I feel about certain passages in books," Julian said. "Everything else disappears, and you're left with pure truth." As the main course arrived, Sophia leaned forward. "Read something to me," she requested impulsively. "Something that matters to you." Julian hesitated, then reached for the book in his bag. "I always carry this with me," he admitted, opening to a dog-eared page of 100 Years of Solitude. His voice softened as he read in perfect Spanish, then translated, "Both would remember that distant afternoon when their father took them to discover ice." "It's beautiful," Sophia whispered. "Why that passage?" "It reminds me that wonder exists in the most ordinary things, depending on your perspective." Julian closed the book. "Like tonight, what began as an ordinary dinner has become something quite extraordinary." Their eyes met across the table. and something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in an unexpected place. The restaurant around them seemed to fade, the judgmental glances and whispers becoming irrelevant in the presence of something authentic. By the time dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate souffle they agreed to share, Sophia and Julian had created their own intimate world beneath the chandelier light. Their hands brushed as they both reached for their spoons, and neither pulled away immediately, the brief contact sending warmth through their fingers. "I have an exhibition next Friday," Sophia said suddenly. "At the Natural History Museum, my Galapagos series. It's nothing fancy, but I'd love to come," Julian replied without hesitation. As they left the restaurant together, Julian helped Sophia with her coat, his fingers lingering briefly at her shoulders. Outside, the night air was cool against their skin, the sounds of the city creating a different kind of music than the restrained chamber pieces that had played inside. "Thank you," Sophia said, turning to face him. "Not just for the rescue, but for seeing me." Julian's hand moved almost of its own accord, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How could anyone fail to see you, Sophia Reyes? You shine brighter than anything in that room." In the soft glow of the street lamps, with the restaurant's golden light spilling onto the sidewalk behind them, Julian leaned forward slowly, giving her time to step away. Instead, Sophia moved closer, her eyes closing as their lips met in a kiss that felt like the beginning of a story neither had planned to write. Beyond first impressions, the Natural History Museum's exhibition hall buzzed with conversation and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes. Sophia stood near her photographs, a vision in an emerald dress borrowed from her sister, more formal than her usual attire but still modest compared to the designer outfits surrounding her. She smiled politely as a museum benefactor commented on her charming little pictures, while her eyes continuously drifted to the entrance. Julian had promised to come, but as the evening progressed, his absence became increasingly conspicuous. Doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps their connection had been a momentary aberration, a romantic fantasy born from the ambiance of an expensive restaurant and nothing more. "Ms. Reyes, these photographs are remarkable," said the museum's curator, approaching with a distinguished older couple. "The Hendersons have expressed interest in potentially funding your next expedition." As Sophia engaged in conversation about conservation efforts in Southeast Asia, she sensed a shift in the room's energy. Glancing toward the entrance, she saw Julian arriving with a small group of colleagues. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his silver-flecked hair catching the light. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and his face brightened with a smile that made her heart flutter. Julian excused himself from his companions and made his way to her side, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "I apologize for being late," he said quietly. "Faculty meeting ran long, and then I needed to pick this up." He handed her the package. "A small congratulations." Curious, Sophia unwrapped it to find a first edition of The Little Prince in Spanish. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it to the inscription. "To Sophia, who, like Saint-Exupéry, knows that what is essential is invisible to the eye. Julian." "This is too much," she whispered, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Not nearly enough," he replied, his voice low and intimate despite the public setting. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Julian remained close, his hand occasionally resting at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. Sophia noticed the subtle reactions of his colleagues, raised eyebrows, curious glances, a few disapproving frowns. "Dean Williams seems less than impressed with your choice of companion," Sophia murmured after a particularly frosty exchange. Julian's jaw tightened. "Margaret believes faculty should socialize exclusively with people of appropriate standing." His tone made clear what he thought of that opinion. "She was similarly disapproving when I declined to date her daughter." "Ah," Sophia nodded, suppressing a smile. "And here I am, lacking both appropriate standing and familial connection." Julian turned to face her fully, his expression serious. You possess something far more valuable, authenticity. Do you know how rare that is in academic circles? He gestured toward a group of professors engaged in animated debate. They're performing erudition rather than experiencing genuine intellectual curiosity. As the evening wound down, they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the exhibition. Julian stood before Sophia's favorite photograph, a Galapagos tortoise emerging from morning mist, its ancient face seeming to hold the wisdom of centuries. "This one speaks to me," Julian said softly. "The solitude, the perseverance." Sophia stepped closer to him. "Tortoises are incredibly resilient. They carry their homes with them, moving slowly but deliberately through life." Her voice grew quieter. "I've always envied that certainty of purpose." Julian turned toward her, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne. "And what is your purpose, Sophia Reyes?" "To capture beauty that might otherwise go unseen," she answered without hesitation. "To make people care about things beyond themselves." She met his gaze directly. "What's yours?" "Until recently, I thought it was to preserve great literature, to guide students toward meaningful engagement with texts." His fingers brushed against hers. "Now I'm not so certain." "What changed?" Sophia asked, though something in his eyes suggested she already knew the answer. "I met someone who made me question whether I've been living according to my own principles or merely following an expected path." Julian's hand now fully enveloped hers. "Someone who sees the world with extraordinary clarity." The museum was emptying, staff beginning to clear away glasses and plates. In the semi-privacy of the moment, Julian drew Sophia closer. "Would you think me terribly forward if I told you I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night at the restaurant?" he murmured. Sophia's laugh was soft and warm. "I'd think you were catching up, because I've been thinking about you since the moment you stood up for me." Their second kiss was deeper than the first, his hands cradling her face with reverent tenderness. Sophia melted against him, her fingers threading through his hair as the world around them receded. "Come home with me," Julian whispered against her lips. The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibility. Sophia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes." Julian's apartment reflected his personality, shelves overflowing with books in multiple languages, comfortable furniture that invited reading for hours, walls adorned with art collected from his travels. But Sophia had little time to observe the details before Julian's lips found hers again, more urgent now in the privacy of his home. They moved together toward his bedroom, shedding layers of restraint along with their clothing. In the soft lamplight, they explored each other with wonder and growing hunger, her hands mapping the unexpected strength beneath his scholarly exterior, his lips tracing the constellation of freckles across her shoulders. "You're beautiful," Julian breathed, as if discovering something precious and unexpected. Sophia, usually self-conscious about her body, toned from hiking through rough terrain but bearing scars from various adventures, felt completely seen and desired beneath his admiring gaze. She pulled him closer, wanting no space between them. Their coming together was neither rushed nor tentative, but a deliberate dance of discovery. Julian moved with controlled passion, his eyes never leaving hers, finding rhythm in shared breath and whispered encouragement. When Sophia shattered beneath him, crying out his name, Julian followed, holding her as if she were the answer to questions he'd been asking his entire life. Afterward, lying in the tangle of his sheets, Sophia traced lazy patterns on Julian's chest, marveling at how quickly certainty had replaced doubt. Whatever this was between them, this connection that defied the conventional timeline of relationships, felt more real than anything she'd experienced before. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Sophia smiled against his skin. "That I came to that restaurant to fulfill a promise to my father, but somehow found a promise of something new instead." Julian's arms tightened around her. "I think some meetings are written into the stars long before we recognize their significance. The literature professor believes in fate," she teased. "The literature professor believes in narrative patterns," he corrected with a smile. And you, Sophia Reyes, are the most beautiful disruption to ever enter my story. Outside, the city continued its nocturnal rhythm, but within the warmth of Julian's bedroom, time seemed suspended, a perfect moment captured like one of Sophia's photographs, preserving the beginning of something neither had been looking for, but both now realized they needed. Weathering storms. 3 months into their relationship, Sophia and Julian had settled into a comfortable rhythm that defied the brevity of their time together. Weekday mornings often found Sophia in Julian's kitchen, barefoot and wearing his shirt, editing photos while he graded papers. Weekends were spent exploring museums, hiking nearby trails, or simply reading in companionable silence in his apartment, her head resting on his lap as he absently stroked her hair. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the first storm clouds gathered. Julian's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications, drawing his attention from the manuscript he was reviewing. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked, looking up from her laptop where she'd been selecting images for a conservation magazine. Julian's expression darkened as he scrolled through messages. "It seems we've become the subject of faculty gossip." He handed her his phone, open to an email from a colleague. The message was ostensibly about department business, but contained a thinly veiled warning. "Concerned about your recent associations affecting the department's reputation. Dean Williams mentioned that your companion at the museum has been seen taking photographs around campus. If she's documenting university grounds, proper channels must be followed." Sophia's stomach tightened. "I was photographing the old oak trees for a personal project. I wasn't aware I needed permission." "You don't," Julian said firmly. "This isn't about permissions. It's about me not belonging in your world," Sophia finished quietly. Before Julian could respond, his phone rang. The screen displayed Eliza Mercer. "My ex-wife," Julian explained with a sigh before answering. Their conversation was brief and tense, ending with Julian promising to address the situation. "Elizabeth heard rumors that I'm dating someone inappropriate," he explained after hanging up. "She's concerned about how it might affect our daughter's perception of the university where she hopes to study next year." Sophia set aside her laptop, suddenly feeling every bit the outsider. "And what exactly makes me inappropriate? My lack of advanced degrees? My practical boots instead of designer heels?" "Sophia, you know I don't care about any of that," Julian said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "But everyone else in your life does. And maybe they're right to question what you're doing with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Julian repeated, his voice rising. "You mean someone passionate, talented, and authentic? Someone who's traveled the world documenting species that might disappear without her work? Someone who makes me happier than I've been in years?" Sophia stood, needing distance to think clearly. "This isn't just about us, Julian. It's about your career, your daughter's future. I won't be the reason you lose what you've spent decades building. I don't care about—" "But you should," Sophia interrupted. "Because those things were important to you long before I arrived, and they'll matter long after I'm gone." Julian froze. "Is that what you want?" "To be gone." The pain in his eyes nearly broke her resolve, but Sophia had spent her life making difficult choices. "I think we need to consider whether this relationship makes sense long-term." The words hung heavily between them, neither willing to bridge the sudden chasm. That evening, Sophia returned to her small apartment for the first time in weeks. The space felt foreign and cold, lacking Julian's presence. She tried to lose herself in work, reviewing footage from her Galapagos expedition, but her thoughts kept returning to the wounded look on Julian's face. The next morning brought another complication. An email arrived from the International Wildlife Conservation Foundation offering her a dream assignment, documenting critically endangered clouded leopards in remote regions of Nepal and northern India. 6 months of travel starting in 3 weeks. Before she could process this news, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "This is Rebecca Williams. I think we should talk about Julian. Coffee at 2 p.m., Verona Cafe?" Sophia recognized the name immediately, Dean Williams's daughter, who Julian had mentioned declining to date. Everything in her wanted to ignore the message, but curiosity, and a desire to understand the world Julian inhabited led her to reply with a simple, "I'll be there." Rebecca Williams proved to be exactly as Sophia had imagined, impeccably dressed, with perfectly highlighted hair and the confident demeanor of someone who'd never been denied finding home autumn-painted Central Park in shades of amber and gold as Sophia crouched near the duck pond, her camera capturing the reflection of falling leaves on still water. 5 months had passed since she'd walked away from Julian, 5 months of Himalayan mountains, elusive clouded leopards, and nights spent in a tent beneath unfamiliar stars. She had returned to New York just 3 days ago, her body still adjusting to the time difference, while her heart adjusted to being in the same city as Julian again. The Conservation Foundation had been thrilled with her photographs, already using them for a major fundraising campaign. Professional success should have filled her with satisfaction, yet something essential remained missing. In the quiet moments between assignments, Julian's face would appear in her thoughts. His gentle smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. How he looked at her as if she were the most fascinating creature he'd ever encountered. Her phone vibrated with a notification. Opening her email, she found a message from the Natural History Museum's director. "Exhibition opening tonight, Endangered Perspectives. Guest curator, Professor Julian Mercer. Your presence specially requested." Sophia stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She hadn't told Julian she was back in the city. After their painful separation and months of silence, she'd assumed he'd moved on, perhaps even taken Rebecca Williams up on her persistent offers. That coffee meeting with Rebecca had been illuminating, though not in the way the dean's daughter had intended. Rebecca had smugly informed Sophia that Julian was merely going through a midlife crisis by dating her, sharing rumors that Sophia was after Julian's family money and academic connections. "He'll tire of you once the novelty wears off," Rebecca had declared. "Men like Julian always return to women who understand their world." The cruel assessment had planted seeds of doubt that bloomed alongside the revelation of her Nepal assignment. Faced with Rebecca's confidence and the opportunity to distance herself from the situation, Sophia had chosen what seemed easiest for everyone. She'd accepted the assignment and ended things with Julian in a brief, painful conversation where she'd cited their different worlds as an insurmountable obstacle. Now, sitting on a park bench with autumn leaves swirling around her feet, Sophia wondered if she'd made the greatest mistake of her life. The exhibition hall of the Natural History Museum was transformed for the evening's event. Unlike traditional wildlife photography exhibitions, this one paired stunning wildlife images with literary passages, creating a dialogue between visual and written art. Sophia slipped in quietly, wearing a simple black dress and the jade pendant Julian had given her on their last weekend together. She moved through the crowd, anonymous among the well-dressed patrons, until she reached the main exhibition space. There, displayed on the central wall, was her photograph of the Galapagos tortoise emerging from the mist, the same one Julian had admired at her exhibition. Beside it hung a framed passage from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, something about time and memory that blurred before her eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. "He selected each pairing himself," said a voice behind her. "Spent months coordinating with photographers and literary estates." Sophia turned to find the museum's curator smiling at her. The entire exhibition was his concept, bringing together endangered species photography with literature that speaks to preservation, memory, and what we stand to lose. Moving through the exhibition with new awareness, Sophia recognized more of her work, not just from the Galapagos series, but photographs from Nepal that had only been submitted to the Conservation Foundation. Each was paired with carefully selected literary passages that seemed to speak directly to her, as if Julian had been conducting a conversation with her through art all these months. Near the end of the exhibition, she found a photograph she didn't recognize. A man sitting alone on a bench in Central Park, autumn leaves falling around him, his face captured in profile as he gazed at an open book. It was Julian, photographed without his knowledge, looking simultaneously strong and vulnerable. The accompanying text was handwritten rather than printed. "What is essential is invisible to the eye. It's the time you've spent on your rose that makes your rose so important. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince. Below this, in Julian's distinctive handwriting, I've spent my time thinking of you, Sophia. Every day makes you more essential to me. I had a student take that photograph, Julian's voice came.